I'm Reverend Phil, and I'm your host for Words of the Prophets. Where are our prophets now? Where are those messages God chooses to communicate divine revelation through? In the past, the Creator has sent prophets like Abraham, Siddhartha, Jesus, Muhammad, and many more. Maybe our higher power has switched tactics since we reinterpret God's words as soon as the Creator's prophets leave us. Could it be that Spirit talks to each one of us individually and we haven't learned to listen? On Words of the Prophets, our modern prophets show us how to find the internal prophet that is the I Am, and we discuss the application of spiritual principles in all aspects of our lives. Love and light, everybody. I'm Reverend Phil, and I'm your host for Words of the Prophets. Today we have a panel of guests. Most of them are been here before, but we'll introduce them to you anyway. To my immediate right is Dan DeMar, and he is a long-term ARE member and used to be a board member, and he is here to represent what's called the Edgar Casey view of the subject. We'll get to that in a second. Sitting next to him is our good friend Chris. If I have to introduce her, something's wrong with you folks. So
we're also friends.
And I'll give you all an opportunity to introduce yourselves. And at the other side of the panel is Don Hendrick, who is the resident teacher of the Santa Fe, I always do this, Thubten Norbuling Tibetan Buddhist Center. Did you get it right this time?
Close enough.
Close enough?
Thubten.
Thubten. I always do that.
At least you didn't say Thubten.
Thubten. Thubten. That's my Bronx accent. Today, our prophetic topic is Be Not Deceived. And I chose this topic because it comes from a practice, a view of spirit that is different from any one that are being represented here. And our topic can be found in the Epistle of Paul the Apostle to the Galatians. This is the King James Bible version. It's chapter 6, verse 7. And the complete statement reads as follows: Be not deceived, God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. So we're going to be talking about karma today, and I chose this because a lot of people say that, Christianity does not talk about karma. But do we really think Paul is teaching us about how to be farmers? Do you think God is being mocked by a farmer? This is a statement, I believe, of some form of interpretation of how karma works. And this show is going to represent 4 different aspects of karma. They may agree, they may disagree. We promise we're not going to fight over it. We're going to put it out there and allow you to listen and choose. You can mix and match. You don't have to follow me. You don't have to follow Dan, Don, or Chris. You can take a little bit from each of us and put it together. And that, to me, is the point of this show, that God is big enough to encompass all kinds of ideas, make them all work, make them all real, and still not be compromised. So I'm going to try to keep quiet and let my guests talk. Let's start with Chris. Chris, you want to do a quick introduction?
Oh, heavens. What would we say about ourselves?
There's 2 people who watch it who have never seen you before.
No. What I would say is, like everyone in the world, I have had profound spiritual experiences that have illuminated various kinds and dimensions of truth and experience that shape our past and our future. And so I have learned to be a truly multidimensional being. And I know that everyone who's listening has had so many experiences themselves. And I think part of the purpose of our being here is to sort of whisper, you guys know this. You have thought this before. And we're just being your voices right now so you can go, yes, I know that. And that's why I'm here.
Cool.
Yep.
Dan.
Well, I, like Chris, have had my own experiences. I learned how to live. I actually had to learn how to live. I was existing prior to that day. And I think the whole idea of these kind of subjects is for us to pass on what little wisdom we did accumulate to someone else. So I'm happy to be here myself.
Don.
And my name's Don Hendrick. I've been on a spiritual journey primarily in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition over the last 20 years. And so I feel very honored to be here on this panel. I've been the resident teacher here in Santa Fe for our center for about 8 years now, and very happy to approach this subject from a Buddhist point of view and my own personal point of view as well. So glad to be here.
So let's start with the basic. And we don't have to point to each other, just jump in and let's start with, how do we define karma? Who wants to
Cause
start?
and effect. I'll start. I think the law of karma is a cosmic law, and all of the great religions have spoken of it. So I loved what you said in the beginning here, that there is cause and effect, action and reaction. The universe is moving, it's evolving. So every thought, every gesture, every energy creates a ripple out. The thing that's so amazing is that we don't realize how big the ripple is that we humans cause by our actions and thoughts.
Okay. Anybody else?
Well, my own thinking is that I like what she said. There's another aspect to it, and that is you reap what you sow. That indicates that there's a more proactive approach to it if you wish. You can choose this. We have free wills. We can choose to be reactive or we can choose to be proactive.
Fantastic.
Can you take that a little bit deeper? What do you
Yes.
mean by proactive and reactive?
Well, reactive, I mean that you can allow, for example, back in my early days, it was always, why did my boss do this to me? How come God did this to me? Why do these things affect me like this? So I react to them instead of understanding how they actually work. Now that I've matured a little bit, I can say that if I plant the seeds of love, kindness, joy, peace, then those kind of fruits come back to me, and indeed they have, so I've experienced it. So now I can live.
Okay. Answer.
Yeah,
Anything
these are
else?
all ideas that are pretty concordant with what the way in which karma is taught in the Buddhist tradition. I always go to a wonderful sort of encapsulation of what karma is that Pema Chodron, really wonderful teacher in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. She speaks to karma not, I don't know if this is an exact quote from one of her books, but one of the ways that she approaches it is that karma is life giving you the lessons you need to learn. So the idea being that we, through the force of our prior actions, have planted those seeds that cause it's ripening into an experience, and there's the lesson right in front of us. We can choose to ignore the lesson and keep having to repeat the same mistake again and again, or we can choose to pay attention and to really find a way to change our minds, change our being so that we don't have to continue to experience patterns of suffering, negativity, dissatisfaction, and so on.
I think it's very important to put forth perhaps the idea that God is not really sitting up there, however you see the word God. I call it the essential source, you know. Is judging you, because in the general public we think of karma as you're being punished for your misdeeds, whereas what you were bringing up is that, again, that ripple, whatever you put out comes back, and you're the one that chooses that. And I feel it's very important in the evolution of humans to come to a place where we take a joyous responsibility and say, I have the power, I have the strength to make that choice, rather than just being buffeted by the winds and feeling that for sure God's going to get us.
Okay, let me just jump in here for a second. So what I'm hearing is cause and effect. Like if I throw throw a rock in a pond, there's going to be ripples. That's cause and effect. There's no punishment, there's no reward. So if I do something, I create something. Buddhist tradition, is it not the goal not to create anything? Isn't total detachment? So I'm not here looking to create positive karma. I'm here to create no karma at all. How does that work, and how do you all feel about that?
I think that's impossible, because again, any gesture, life itself creates that ripple. So, and it's very simplistic to say good karma and bad karma anyway.
Yes.
You know, or that you're going to be either punished or rewarded. I feel that humans must let go of that concept that somebody else is choosing. We're either going to be punished or we're going to be applauded. When will we be at peace? When will we be at peace and realize that even if you misuse power, and I might have said at the beginning that I've been doing incarnational work for 55 years, which is, I think, pretty much the record. And what I would say that I've learned from that is truly that it's not, karma is not back and forth. You were bad in the last lifetime and you misused your power, so you're going to get it in this lifetime. It's more of a hologram. Everything is connected to everything. So how it comes up for you is very different than that black and white view.
I think we put those values of good and evil, good and bad
Yeah.
on everything we do, and that value shouldn't be there. It just is. So anything that you do in your life, you're going to have to reap the reward of those seeds that you've planted. So with karma, you only meet yourself. You don't meet others.
Well said.
And others don't impact what happens to you.
Well said. You meet yourself.
You meet
Indeed you
yourself.
do.
I mean, I singled you out, Don, because we were talking off air about this interview I did with the Tibetan teacher from San Francisco that never made it onto the air.
Correct.
He was actually in Tibet when the Chinese invaded. And I'll never forget that interview with him. I mean, it was calm. This man was about as smooth as anything. I mean, and I guess that comes from, he said he was meditating 6 hours each day to start, which is just mind-boggling. And we talked about being in Tibet, and his basic response to me was, if I were to take up arms defending what I thought was my land and hurt somebody, I would create karma. By allowing it to happen, I just didn't create anything. So that's why I asked the question, if are we here to create what we consider, and I don't buy into good either, but I was just using that term as how people would generally approach it. Am I here to create something that I think is going to be constructive, forward-moving, or do I keep repeating the lesson, or do I not create anything at all?
I think, to what Chris said, I don't think you can get to a point where you're creating nothing at all. And in Buddhism, the concept of karma is deeply tied to this sort of part of our mind that we call intention, which is the idea that whenever our mind moves in a particular direction, call it positive, negative, good, bad, whatever, we are creating an energy behind that, if you will. And that energy has this ripple effect that will come back in a myriad number of ways. And so even when you get to the state of complete enlightenment, which is what our tradition, the Mahayana tradition, is referring to as a state of Buddhahood, a state where the mind is completely purified of all those things that bring about suffering for ourselves and others, and completely enhanced with all the positive qualities that we all know are positive qualities, the things that do create more harmony and inclusion and connectedness and what have you. Even when you get to that point, you can't say that a Buddha doesn't create karma, because they still have a mind that is still creating this. It might become sort of a, I don't know what the right word for it would be, but perpetually creating only what is positive and good and wholesome in terms of the effects on others. But really, when it comes to defining things as good, bad, again, this gets to be a little bit of a duality. Yeah. But in Buddhism, it's really done by what is the result. In terms of, if we are creating an action like what you were describing, where it's going to result in the killing of others or harming of others, such as what this monk might have chosen to do in the face of Chinese occupation, then it would have created that type of result for oneself again. So why we would want to engage in something that is really just going to perpetuate the suffering of others and the suffering of ourselves, it doesn't make sense. And then you look at the other side of it, we really define only what we would say is a good karma by virtue of the positive results that we see from it. So when we act with patience in the face of others harming us, then we create a much more positive energy, because we're not harming them. We're actually in a space of some acceptance and some willingness to create more positive qualities within ourselves.
Two separate things. Go ahead.
I have to jump. There are two aspects here that I wanted to bring forward. One is, you were talking about, sort of the intent of creation. I think there's a lot in the Judeo-Christic world specifically of self-righteousness, where we feel, well, I'm the good guy, I'm right, these guys are the bad karma. And we have to be able to let that go, so that we're not creating, see, this is this reward idea again. We're not creating because someone's going to pat us on the head and say, well, you're a divine being, you're a good person, but that we actually live that kind of consciousness and mind. And the second part is a message that has been a profound teaching for me from my own higher self, which is the voice of your own soul, let's say your inner voice, which said, if someone harms you, if someone wants to harm you, when we're looking at karma from a big perspective, my work, incarnational work, my higher self said, if someone doesn't like you or wants to hurt you, you can be sure that there is a place where you have extended that energy beforehand. Mm-hmm. So it's a back and forth. So it's very difficult to say who's the good one and who's the bad one, because there are those elements, because we're all good people. So if someone doesn't like you, there has to be a reason, and you are the reason. And some deep level of the flow of the illusion of time that we have, past, present, and future. And when we think of it that way, then we have the option of having the patience and the kindness and the compassion for someone else, rather than you're bad because you don't like me or you're hurting me, but rather perhaps I hurt you, so let me give a gesture to you in some way, whatever way that comes for different people, that rebalances that, so that we're not in the play. As you're talking, we're not in the play.
Do you want to say something? Go
yes,
ahead.
I think also that this talk here kind of presupposes a real purpose for what we're doing here on the earth to begin with. I mean, it's not accidental that we're all here. And since I represent the KC readings, let's say, one of the things that he mentioned in there was that each person has to find his own relationship to the universal forces. That universal force is a collective consciousness. So you're always striving to do well or better than you were yesterday. That's an innate human trait.
Absolutely.
So
you folks are bringing up more questions than I'm holding into my mind every time you say something. So I got three things I want to throw out there. I want to start with the comment you made. I believe in three types of karma. One of them is a collective karma. It's not just the individual, it's the group karma. So you're talking about the Judeo-Christian belief structure. So let me throw this out with no animosity or any ill will, but if I interpret karma the way I interpret karma, then Judaism created its own karma by isolating itself by saying, we are the one child of God. We are the chosen people. And that's created an isolation which created a persecution that goes on to this day. How do you folks feel about...
But look who's doing the persecution today.
Well,
that's a perfect example of karma.
Well, I think that goes on in most of in Abrahamic traditions. That, I mean, even in the beginning of Roman Catholicism, as they were being persecuted by the Romans, they were persecuting the non-Catholic Christians.
That's right.
So I mean, we are not, but we're setting the groundwork. So I guess my question is, do we believe in a collective karma?
Absolutely, I do.
Yeah, I think there's, in Buddhism, that concept is taught. And again, the extent to which it works is pretty unfathomable, because once you start getting it outside of the realm of even just one person's karma, it becomes pretty unfathomable. But then when you start dealing with collective stuff and things that are going on for us as a race or for individual parts of this world. But the other thing that's always happening here too that I think is that there's nothing, although there might be some sort of continuity of an identity of a people, the individuals who are within that are constantly changing by virtue of reincarnation. So, for example, if we looked at like the Palestinian-Jewish conflict, there's no doubt that at some point people who were persecuted as Palestinians might be reborn as Israelis doing the persecution in another. And so, like,
yes.
you can hold on to it at some level in regard to how it's manifesting in this
and you
world,
come into
but
that.
the individuals within it might have their own karma that they need to work out
Beautiful.
within the context.
And
Always.
and they have a magnetism that attracts that. I would feel that we are a collective soul group, and that we come in, and there's no one on this planet that you don't have karma with, that you don't have a relationship to, whether it's through the themes of your own evolution of your soul, or whatever elements, personal or collective, but that group energy is what allows us to move back and forth. You know, whether you're playing the Palestinian or you're playing the Jewish guys or you're playing the Muslim or whatever you're playing in there. In actuality, if we had more illumination about incarnation, we would see that, in effect, we have put on all those hats, we've carried all those roles. And if we could touch that, we could see each other differently.
Okay, so that brings me to question number 2, not number 1. We'll get back to number 1. Number 2, how do... I shouldn't be doing this on the air. If we are here and we're constantly creating karma, to borrow the Buddhist phrase, how do I get off the wheel?
That is the question for all of us.
Do I ever get off the wheel?
Well, again,
Yes.
you don't stop creating karma, because what we mean by karma is action of the mind and
Cause and
so,
effect.
So what we're really trying to do, in a sense, in a Buddhist path, is to recognize that those things that are negative, again by that definition I mentioned earlier, but just by virtue of the results they bring about, are what we need to be free of. And then what we need to enhance and grow are those things that are positive by virtue of the results that they bring.
But do I ever get off the wheel?
Well, in Buddhist terms, that comes down to having the recognition of selflessness, which is a pretty profound subject. Maybe we do another TV
There's
show
still a
on
wheel.
that.
It's just a different octave of wheel.
You know,
So this is an ongoing soul journey that never ends?
According to the Edgar Casey readings, what would happen is that this immutable law, this karmic law that exists, it has to be answered in every case. But you have a free will. You can choose to be subject to the law and let the law perfect you, or you can operate voluntarily and operate under what Casey would call the law of grace, which is you sow the seeds of goodness, righteousness, and you actually become the law. You're not subject to that law anymore. You perfect the law within yourself.
But didn't Casey just say that perfection happened in that one soul life? Doesn't say about... I don't believe he ever talked about the extended soul. I mean, I'm just curious.
Here's my take
Go
on
for
this. Or I shouldn't say my take. This is what's been given to me, is that there will never be an end to incarnations. There will never be an end in terms of the wheel of karma, cause and effect, action and reaction, because it's cosmic law that there is continual evolution, that the cosmos would fall in on itself if the unmanifest didn't manifest. So we will always incarnate, therefore we will always be a part of cause and effect. In what form? For example, imagine an enlightened consciousness. What form would that be? But it will be a form, because thought has energy. And so the wheel of karma will always continue, but on what level we experience that is what you're talking about, the power of free will, the power to not talk about or force that I'm going to be enlightened, but rather that you experience that energy. And so then how you create karma by your thoughts, by your presence, by your energy, changes the pulse, even the cosmic pulse of energy, of reality.
Two separate teachings that coming together with that statement. One was Casey. Casey talked about, and I think, not only Casey, I think Swedenborg talked about it as well, that we are here to learn how to be companions with the divine. That's the reason behind karma, to teach us how to get out of self-will, to choose God's will, that make us the companion of God, because God, in its infinite wisdom, decided that by itself it was limited and needed companions to grow. That's fairly accurate description of
That's
Casey?
as good as I could do.
Okay. So, I perfect something here, law of grace. I get to someplace by choice as opposed to by experience, and the choice has gotten me to a spiritual understanding that the experience was supposed to get me to. I don't have to have that experience. Go ahead.
Well, I would say that they're not separate choice and experience. My higher self would say that experience is the only truth. It's just that that truth changes as you experience. So when we choose something, how do we choose? We don't choose because we have some illumination up here that's not connected to our humanity. We choose as a part of our experiences. This is where the wheel of karma comes in, that we have experienced many, many lifetimes, either through great-great-great-grandparents or the imprint of divine beings, as is true of the self. So the choice comes because we experience, and this is where karma comes in here. You may misuse your power in another lifetime. And so we are intelligent beings. And so something in this divine evolutionary path of the soul will search for something that will take it from that. It'll use that experience and it will grow more loving, more cosmic through the experiences. So they're not separate. They dance together.
They always dance together.
They always
That's
dance
where
together.
that's one of the topics, which is the karmic debt versus karmic memory.
Uh-huh.
You know, that we carry the memory, and it's the memory, and it's kind of a debt, and I'm not sure we could separate them. I want to go back to my second teaching. I had a teacher. He was actually a 5th century Buddhist monk who was channeled through somebody back east, a friend of mine. He taught that his main teaching was there were 12 virtues we here to master. And he listed the virtues, and when we get each lifetime, we have a blueprint, and the blueprint is like master strokes, mid-range strokes, minor strokes. These are the experiences we're here to have. And we get like 1, maybe 2 chances at 1 or 2 of the virtues at each time. Now that was a basic description for him of karma. But what I was getting to was one of the things he talked about was this, what you're talking about, soul groups. That in the book of Revelation, they talk about 144,000 shall be saved. And what he said was, it's not 144,000 individual souls, it was 144,000 collectives of varying sizes. Some could be a few hundred, some could be a few billion, anywhere in between. And what he was saying was, which I think you started touching on, is the whole group has to go forward together. Not part of the group advances, but the whole group advances. How does that fit in with what we're talking about?
Well, for one thing, and just really briefly, what happens to you happens to me. So if you choose a lower energy of mine, and I'm going to be king of the mountain, that's going to influence me and force me basically to make choices. You know, and so we are not any of us separate. What you think, what you experience, what you choose will influence me, and so we play that back and forth. We're not at all separate. So it's not. We have to wait till the lowest guy gets to the top. Humans are always putting things in boxes. You know, I'm saying it's this big and this big. And we really want to do those kind of things, whereas the cosmos works in spiraling a different way that energy moves. But again, we did choose to come here together, and how much enlightenment we experience in the self depends on how we interface with the inner life and the outer life.
That is the key, in my opinion, is to put those things into your practical life,
Yes.
such that you become that. And essentially, that's, I think, what Casey would say is, you become the law.
I love that. You become the law.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Does anything that teachers say resonate with what you understand in Buddhism? And he was just a plain Buddhist. He wasn't a Tibetan or a Zen.
I haven't really heard this concept in Buddhist teachings. And so, again, because there still is although there's a bit of an illusion of separateness and an individual,
Yes.
there still is in terms of an individual consciousness. Because, again, we don't really have the concept of a soul, but we have the concept of a continuity of consciousness, of awareness. And so the idea is that has its own track, if you will. And the karma that one creates shapes and influences that. It doesn't mean that we're independent of others. In fact, it's the exact opposite. There's, as Chris has already pointed out, there's an interconnection that cannot be denied, that your actions do influence my actions and so on. but we each still have an individual responsibility to find our own kind of inner wisdom, the source of all of that, and express it in terms of our actions.
And then do as we're doing on this panel, which is sharing it without having to enforce it on the other people.
Exactly.
Because in the end, and according to Chinese medicine, in the end, all opposites will come together. And that's the yin and the yang. There's a place where no matter how different our conversations are, they will congeal.
Yeah, I would have to agree.
Maybe that's human consciousness, but we do come together whether we think we are or not.
So our object at some point is to not make the divine small, but make the divine large, that encompasses everything.
Or make
regardless.
ourselves divine.
Harmony was the number one virtue that this guy's name was Chet Lau. He teaches, and anybody who's interested, I have the complete set of the 12 virtues as channeled on audio files on my website. It's actually a spot on my navigation bar. It just says Chet Lau teaching, I think, or something like that, 12 virtues.
I would like to comment a little bit about, how human nature always tends to reduce things to something it can understand. So we have a tendency to say, well, we want God to fit into this box so that we can handle him. But really, I think the real purpose for our being here is to allow the divine to express itself through us.
Yes.
God goes through you.
And selflessness, like the Buddhists preach, is really the same thing that Casey said thousands of times. In fact, I think he even went so far as to say the master of masters, the one who did perfect this karmic situation, was more Buddhist than he was anything. Because it's a way of life, it's not a religion.
Right.
I want to go back on something we touched on. I think, Don, you're the one who talked about it, intention. That is so important to what we do. It creates the reality of what we do. So we're here as a panel. We have more than two choices, but let's simplify them. We have two choices. We can come on a show and say, I'm going to prove to these people how wise and wonderful I am and how much I know. Or I'm here to say, we're here to help, we're here to teach, we're here to open up the possibilities that are infinite and give you a small understanding of those infinite possibilities. So the action can be the same, but the intention behind it is different, and therefore each one creates a different ripple, a different karmic memory. Are we kind of, how do we feel about that?
And there we would fall into, from my perspective, the word of consciousness. That intention and consciousness have their own relationship there. Because when you say intention, for people who do not understand Buddhism, intention means, I will do it this way. I intend it this way. That's really not what we mean by intention. We mean by intention that we have a vision, that we hold this higher energy, so that the intention and the consciousness infuses into that intention. And that's what takes us from the individual self and the individual will to truly free will, which free will always include seeing the hologram. My action, if I take this step, is going to ripple out like this, and so I have that consciousness of that. And then I choose that out of a higher perspective.
Isn't free will giving me the choice of what I choose to see, and that creates what ripple I create, as opposed to saying it's going to give me the bigger picture? I could I could have free will and choose the narrow picture.
Certainly you could.
Yes.
Certainly you could, absolutely.
I really won't, I promise.
And I would say, free will is a funny idea, because it's been attached so much to, again, a humanized perspective. I love what you just said. A humanized perspective of a God, who's allowing you this free will so you can flop around and eventually grow, rather than that free will comes from within. Freedom comes from within. You know, and many people who suffer so much on the planet suffer because they never realized that they had free will, that they could choose. They always thought, I am the victim. And so when we look at karma and these kinds of conversations, we have to begin to take ourselves out of this horizontal tiger chasing its tail illusion of being the victim.
I mean, it's one of the other ways that karma manifests in terms of, we often talk about this idea of the experiences being the main way that we see a result, but in
Yes.
Buddhism, one of the main ways that karma manifests, which is perhaps for those negative tendencies its most heinous way, is that it creates a pattern to do the same thing again and again and again, and that becomes very closed off to this concept of having any choice, having any ability to make a decision in the moment to do something otherwise, because we've already created that through the past, the tendency to kill, the tendency to harm, the tendency to, to have violence in the face of what we encounter. And so all of those tendencies, they're not independent. They are definitely dependent upon what we've done in the past. But there has to be an opening. And if what we're doing here today creates some opening for someone to be able to look at those patterns and say, I can make a choice to not be the way that I've been. I don't have to have anger in my mind. I don't have to have pride and jealousy and so on. I can make a conscious choice to do something else.
Especially if they can hold this beautiful thing that you said a moment ago, which is that basically that the consciousness, the mind continues forever.
Yeah.
Continues forever.
Yeah.
That can release us from the struggle and the survival to know that this capacity to look upon life, whether that's in human form or within the cosmos, that it's there, it belongs to you, it will always belong to you, it always has.
There's a reading from Edgar Cayce too that says good lasts forever.
It does.
So let me throw this statement out to all of you and see what your reactions are. Karma is theoretical. We may believe in it, but really cannot prove it. It's almost like God. Along with karma, there's a law of grace, which I believe is real. Along with the law of grace is the law of free will. We get to choose. So what I'm hearing that you saying is something I work with my clients on a spiritual level. Karma is a fascinating social conversation. Whether I was a prince or a pauper, a pimp or a prostitute, does not matter. All of them, probably, especially the latter. That's another story for another show. It's what you just said. All of you in a different way. It doesn't matter what that is. I will never know. If I believe those three laws exist, as a human being, I will never know which part of any of those three laws I am acting under. Therefore, it doesn't matter what law I'm acting under. It's what am I doing? And why am I doing it? That's what matters. That the rest of that stuff is just interesting talk show stuff.
It is interesting that in the last probably 15 years, the word karma has come into everyone's household, no matter who they are. I find that fascinating.
John Lennon did that. Instant karma's going to get you.
Instant karma's going to get you, but I think all three of us would like to stretch out in there and not have it be this thing held over you so that you're terrified to move, But theoretical, what I think is that our sense of self, our emotional sense of self, influences so much the choices that we make. And what I found is that the emotional body has trouble finding its way out of anger and separation until it touches a spiritual energy, which is innate to all humans. And then suddenly there's an expansion, and we really can, even if it's for a flicker, because I've worked with killers and rapists, even for a flicker we can say, I'm a good person. And the moment that occurs, there's a huge leap in the evolution.
Yeah, we'd call that waking up your Buddha nature.
Yes.
Your Buddha potential that we all have.
That we all have.
I would, I have maybe a little bit different approach I wouldn't say that karma is theoretical. I would say that karma is actually how the universe works.
I agree.
It is a fundamental law that cannot be broken, and everybody answers to it. The real possibilities for a human being is that he has a choice on how to handle it.
And again, back to the creating thing,
Yes.
that the choice that you make does create that ripple, and that is eternal.
Yeah.
You're not stuck with the choice you made
right.
at all, in
I
this
put this-
lifetime or another.
I put this show together because of what you just said. I chose you three because each one of you have the experience, the study, whatever, to talk about the subject. I've had a couple of hundred people pass through my shows over the last couple of decade and a half. I chose you three because of your depth of understanding and knowledge and wisdom. But what you say and believe as a universal law, there's probably 97% of the guests I have had on this show who would not agree with that.
I can't imagine.
Yeah.
Because as you pointed out earlier, I mean, it is true that in pretty much every spiritual tradition, there's some idea that there's some ramifications of the actions that we do. The extent of which those teachings, is how much theory or dogma you might put behind them is up to each individual tradition. But I think at some level, if you ask people do you have to experience the effects of your actions? Even if it's a more immediate thing in terms of what we might, call instant
John
karma.
Lennon.
Yeah.
Which, again,
Lennon
is
effect there.
but the idea being that there's some belief that we're not just kind of isolated from that, and that we can do whatever we want, and there's no ramifications at all.
I think that would be impossible to believe. Believe is kind of a strange word as far as I'm concerned. But I don't think there's a person on the planet who hasn't seen that in action.
Yeah.
Whether they use the word karma or think of it in theological terms or whatever terms they look at it. They know if I do this, you're going to react to me, or this is what happened when I did that. And so they will feel that back and forth.
Yeah.
Everyone.
Yes, but
Let's hit the butt.
the world, if people were embracing that concept, cause and effect, not even punishment and reward, just cause and effect, that there's something out there that's there to help us, teach us to grow on a spiritual level, I suggest the world would not be as in such disarray as it is. So I'm suggesting that the rest of this world out there, if they believe in it, they really don't, because look at what they're doing.
The reason they don't is that they don't feel that they have free choice. They don't feel that their actions make any difference. And there's a difference between cause and effect and reward and punishment.
Yes.
Most of the people who use the word karma think of it in terms of reward and punishment. Those two words are always about something outside us doing it to us. And that's where the free will, that's what we're talking about here. There's a huge difference.
Yeah, we always, if we always reduce things in terms of what we can understand, we can't help but fail according to the law. If we are selfless in our determination, then we allow the bigger picture to come in, and we see beyond the horizons or the walls that we put up around ourselves. So in my opinion, consciousness of the human race, to get to your predicament, you're either selfless or you're selfish. And those two viewpoints, one looking this way or this way, cause us to either be responsible to the law or give us the opportunity to overcome
But one of the things that karma teaches us is, I'm here to change me. I cannot change anybody else.
Yes.
Correct.
Yet the whole world is out there trying to change everybody else, from dictating who can and cannot be married, to
correct.
what you should say, to, we're fighting over lands, we're fighting over minuscule differences in beliefs of a deity. So, I hear what you're saying. And the reason I'm doing the show is hopefully to expand some consciousness out there. But go ahead.
I'm sorry.
You know where I'm
I have to say that if we could expand life into a bigger arena, we would see that it's not falling apart. It's coming together. What's happening is that the humans in our evolution are moving from survival, which is I'll take your land and I'll take your food and I'll take your power, to a place of consciousness that says we will always exist. When we have that awareness, this is the beauty of incarnational work, people's fear of death and their need to be king of the mountain begins to quiet down. No one has to tell them to do that. It happens. And so what I feel is happening is that all the fighting that's going on is just a way, we're washing out now from the earth and from the human evolution the patterns that we've had up to this point, which are all about survival. Now we're beginning, you know, even to think about karma and a bigger arena, cosmic truth. We're beginning to sense something that takes us out of the terror of non-existence.
So that brings us back to that opening statement. Be not deceived, God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. So part of, and I hear what you're saying, and I, excuse me, and not that I disagree with it.
So we're reaping what's happened in the past.
Exactly.
Yes, we are. But we're not that. We're not that.
We are not that, but again, that's what this show is about, to get that message out to people that we are not that. There's something greater. But we're running out of time, and I want to come back to this for a second. One of the things Casey talked about over the time frame of the late 40s and 50s up until now, was the reenactment of the conflict that created the ultimate sinking of Atlantis. The two groups that, was it the children of the light or the children of the one and the sons of Belial, and they were in conflict because one was the spiritual, one was the selfish, and that we're coming back to reenact that. You know, so I mean,
since we were there.
Yeah,
yes.
Well, we're still getting
we have
choice.
met the enemy, and he has us.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, is how do we, learn to take that responsibility?
I think what we do is we exercise our free will and we decide to do something different. And for these reasons, because we know what the effect is going to be if we sow that seed. Mm-hmm. We should have learned it already. The law should have taught us this because of the hard knocks that we're going through there. We just haven't sunk in.
Well, the lessons are out there. It's just a matter of we
embrace
the lessons.
We're coming to
it. Be patient. We're coming to it.
See, and this is where in this whole Buddhist concept of selflessness, I think what happens is that you can have an awareness of karma, but it can still be very much focused on oneself, where one only becomes aware of one's own individual experiences and not the interconnectedness. And so when we have that illusion of self, that we are isolated from the whole world, karma helps us to start to look at that, but you do have to go further. You can't just stop at an awareness of karma. If you don't begin to break through that illusion of self, you're never going to be able to take karma, or the principle of karma, to the fullest results that you can.
Oh, I totally agree. I mean, I was a drug addict. I was not a very pretty person. And I really believe there was karma obviously involved in that.
Something you were
I
clear.
don't know if I was supposed to have ended sooner, not ended at all, or ended just on time, because that's that difference between grace, free will, and karma. Who knows? But the lesson was, yes, it was about self. But I didn't see being safe by being embraced and embracing something larger than me. I saw being safe by withdrawing into me.
And that's why you hit the bottom.
Yes.
That's how you hit the bottom.
But that was the gift.
Of course.
Exactly.
But not everybody gets that gift. Not everybody comes back, because I don't know what this world would look like if everybody came back like a drug addict like I was.
Well, that's why we have to change the word punishment. Were you being punished to be a drug addict? Absolutely not. But maybe you were judgmental of drug addicts in other lifetimes. You were a very religious person that said, these are the laws and the rest of you be gone.
Or I was a profiteer and I ran an opium den.
Yeah.
Well, you had a chance to experience it all around the whole.
Exactly.
As Spock would say, for the good of the whole.
Yes. We're starting to run down on time. We've got to talk about this earlier. Any of you have any announcements you need to make about any upcoming events?
Our events are all the time. Every Sunday we have meditation at the Light Institute in Galisteo.
Okay.
And after which we have a knowings class.
And we're flashing everybody's contact information on the screen, so if you have any questions, you can contact them, or you can contact me and I'll put you in touch with them. Anything you want to announce, sir?
The ARE has study groups in Albuquerque, and we have different speakers coming in, so contact the contact information on the screen.
And there's a study group going on still here in Santa Fe.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I encourage people to go to our website to check out our events and just keep an eye on it, because we're only doing about a month at a time, because we have a wonderful teacher from Nepal, Geshe Tupten Sherab, who'll be arriving in August, and he'll be here for about 4 months. So just stay tuned in terms of big events with him while he's here. So.
And that's the person we talk about maybe getting on the
Yes,
show,
I hope
which
so.
would be way cool. So stay tuned. You'll hear more about that. I just want to make a couple of quick announcements, and then we will get back to kind of wrap up. This is public access television. That means you are the people who are important. It's about you. We're here for you. You're not here for us. Love to hear from you. Do you like what you're hearing? Do you want to hear something else? Do you have specific questions about anything you heard? You can contact me with the phone number, with the email. I am open to any contact. I've had people contact me and say, I'd like to do a show with you, and I've had several viewers who turned into guests. So anything's possible. You're the public, get involved. Also, just so you know, I'm a counselor. I do spiritual counseling. I do not do religious counseling. I work with the spirit, in the spirit, not because of any one particular dogma or belief. I have my own set of beliefs, and I work hard not to impose them on anybody. So if you think that I could be of service, contact me. I work on a donation basis. So if money's an issue, it's not an issue. Spirit takes care of me. It doesn't have to be through you. We will, be happy to talk to you. Like I said, it just, if your spirit is moving and say, I need to talk to somebody about how to do this, how not to do this, I'd be happy to work with you. So thank you. Parting thoughts. We've got about 5-6 minutes. Chris, you want to start?
Oh my.
Oh my.
Let's see, divided by 4. My parting thoughts would be
You can have my time.
would be that we need to laugh about karma. We need to experience the grace of being in body. It's such a gift, and we have the power to be here. And I think it's easier than we think to look out in the world and say, I want the best for you. And the best for you is the best for me. And to trust that all that you do, that karma that you do, does give you back that wonderful reaping energy, and move to that direction and do it with grace and humor.
Beautiful. You, sir.
There's an interesting reading that I came across in preparing for this meeting, and I'll just throw it out there. And I don't have a belief about it yet, but somebody asked Edgar Casey, what about Jesus? Now, he said, he is karma. He is your karma. He is the answer to all karma. I suppose that means if you need help, the divine is always ever present, and all you have to do is be filled with it. And these things that were so troublesome to us, because we are going to have to meet all those things, if they are any trouble, they kind of disappear if you have that kind of help. So I suppose there's lots of hope in the world.
Well, just to interject just for a second, and I'm not real good with scripture, but isn't Jesus quoted as saying, I am the way, I am the path?
Mm-hmm.
Could that be
I
what
am the
Casey's
truth and the
referring
light.
to?
That's what I think.
I like
Yes.
the light part.
That's
Yeah,
what,
not to be worshipped, but to be emulated and followed.
exactly the pattern.
Yes.
Oh, wow, such wonderful things that have already been said, so I'm not sure I can say much more, but I would encourage people, to think in terms of the freedom that an awareness of karma brings, in terms of no longer kind of, when I was starting to teach people on this subject, I used to always say, well, the teachings on karma are to tell you to get in the driver's seat, not be in the back seat, but then I realized that you've already been in the driver's seat, you've just been a really bad driver. So I just think that there's a freedom once you kind of know the rules of the road, once you kind of know how it works and how you can actually enjoy the ride.
Amen.
Oh, I have to jump in here for just a second
Go for
and
it.
say that, it isn't this vertical thing. It isn't that you've been a bad driver. You might have been a good driver as well, but there was one little thing that you needed to thread in there, and that's the beauty
Yes.
of incarnating again and again, is that it isn't that we're coming from bad to better, but that we're expanding the expression of the good,
Amen.
of the beauty.
The divine. Yeah.
I
Of the
thank
divine.
you all. You guys are great. Thank you so much for being guests.
Thanks for
We
having
thank
us.
you.
Yeah, thanks for having us here.
I just want to leave the audience, the viewing audience, with a couple of thoughts. One of the thoughts that comes to mind is how we view karma is how we view the divine. If we see a punishing God, then we're going to see karma as punishment, maybe a little reward. If we see God as unconditionally loving, then we will see that there is nothing karmically brought to us that is not for our benefit, that it's here to teach us how to become better spiritual beings, and there's nothing greater than that. And it's only the limitation of our ability to love and our limitation of our ability to see that we are more than just this one incarnation, this body at this time and place, that we hear over and over and over again. One of the things Casey said about Jesus was the one, the path, set the record that Jesus went through 30 incarnations to get to that enlightened state, so let's say, but that we have as many as we need, and maybe for another show we can enhance on this, but my soul is here in various aspects at the same time. I'm not just learning as Phil. I could be learning as somebody else in another state or another part of the world. God loves us unconditionally and gives us that opportunity to learn what that unconditional love is. And it's just a matter of how do we see the divine? How do we see spirit? If you hear that spirit is punishing, don't buy that. Check to your heart. Your heart will tell you that there's nothing but love for you. And all the experiences we bring to us are the ones that teach us. We bring it to us because we need those lessons and we're ready for them at that time. So until next week, be one with the divine, walk in love and light, and see that everybody you're encountering is also one with the divine and walking in love and light. Until next time, blessings to you all. I'm Reverend Phil, and I've been your host for Words of the Prophets. Thank you for tuning in. Please join me again next week, same time, same channel, for more Words of the Prophets.